The notary didn't say anything at first. She just stared at the folder I set on her desk, then looked up at me, then back down at the folder. Her face had gone the color of old chalk. "Sir," she said, "where did you get these?" "From a box my son tried to throw in the dumpster," I said. She picked up her phone and said she needed to make a call. Not to me. Not about scheduling. She turned slightly away from me and spoke quietly, and the only words I caught clearly were "county recorder," and "we have a problem." I sat in that chair and thought about my wife, about how she used to fold everything in thirds before she put it in a folder, how she'd label each tab in her careful, slanted handwriting, how she never threw anything away. She had been gone 11 months, and my son had waited exactly 9 of them before deciding it was time to clean out her filing cabinet. My wife's name was Gloria. She grew up in Beaumont, Texas, the youngest of 5 kids, and she carried her whole childhood in the way she handled money, carefully, quietly, without ever making a fuss about it. Her father had been a refinery worker who lost his job in the late 70s and never fully recovered. She watched her mother clip coupons and keep a ledger by hand, every dollar accounted for. That never left her. When we married, I was 31 and working in commercial HVAC. She was 28 and working at a title company, which is where she learned more about real estate than most people pick up in a lifetime. She knew how deeds worked, how liens attached, how title transfers happened. She understood things I never thought to ask about. We raised 2 kids in a house outside of Lubbock. Our son, Gregory, he was the older one by 4 years. Our daughter, Addie, she was the quieter one. Easier. Gregory was always the one with the ideas, the plans, the reasons why everything needed to happen a certain way. Even as a child, he had a way of making you feel like you were behind on something. Gloria used to say he had a salesman's mind. She said it the way you'd say someone had a good arm, acknowledging a gift while privately noting that it could cause trouble. She was right, as it turned out. She was right about a lot of things. Gregory moved back to Lubbock about 6 years ago. He was between jobs at the time, or so he said. His wife, Sandra, had family nearby, and they had 2 young kids, and it seemed reasonable. It seemed like the right thing, being close to family. That's what I told myself. He started dropping by the house regularly. Checking in on us, he called it. At first, it was once a week. Then it became more frequent. He would come by when Gloria was at her Tuesday morning car group, or when I was out running errands, and he would sit in the kitchen with whoever was home and just talk. I didn't think anything of it at the time. He was my son. He started offering to help with things, driving us to appointments, taking over the grocery run, small things, and then, gradually, bigger things. He offered to help us with our taxes one year because he had a friend who did returns for a flat fee and could get us a better deal than our accountant of 20 years. I said we were fine. Gloria said the same. He offered again the following spring. The 3rd year, he didn't ask. He just said he'd taken care of it. We paid him back, of course. He gave us a number and we wrote him a check. I don't know now what that money actually went toward. Gloria got sick in the spring of the year. She turned 71. Not suddenly. She had been slowing down for a couple of years, and we knew her heart wasn't strong, and her doctor had been watching a few things. But when it tipped fast. By June, she was having real trouble. By late summer, she was mostly home. During that time, something changed in her. She had always been a private person, especially about finances. She managed our accounts, kept all the paperwork, handled everything in her quiet, organized way, and I trusted her completely because she had never given me a reason not to. I was not a man who paid close attention to balances and statements. That was her domain, and I was grateful for it. But that fall, she started talking to me differently. Not more, less in some ways, but more directly when she did. She would say things in a particular tone that I'd come to recognize over 40 years of marriage, the tone that meant, "This matters, so listen." One evening in October, she called me into the small office off the hallway, the room where she kept the filing cabinet and the desk and her boxes of organized folders, and she sat down across from me and said, "Rudy, I need you to promise me something." That was my name she used when she was serious. Not honey, not anything else. Rudy. I said, all right. She said, if something happens to me, before you let anyone go through my things, before Gregory, before anyone, you take that gray box on the bottom shelf and you bring it to Ann Fielder. Ann Fielder was a real estate attorney she had known for over 20 years. They had worked together at the title company when they were both young and had stayed in contact ever since. I said, Gloria, you're going to be fine. She said, I know, but promise me anyway. I promised her. She died in February. Quietly, at home, the way she had wanted. The hospice nurse was there, and Addie had driven down from Amarillo to be with us, and we held her hands, and it was as peaceful as something that terrible can be. Gregory arrived the next morning. I don't want to make him into a cartoon. He grieved his mother. I believe that. He cried at the funeral, and he made the arrangements, and he handled the logistics in the weeks after, with the same efficient energy he brought to everything. People told me what a good son he was. How lucky I was to have him. He was at my house almost every day for the first 2 months. Helping, he said. Managing things. He took over paying the household bills, just temporarily, he said, while I got my bearings. He had access to the checking account because Gloria had added him years ago for emergencies, and he was using it, he said, for the regular expenses. I was not paying attention. That is the plain truth of it. I was 69 years old and I had just lost my wife of 41 years, and I was not tracking spreadsheets. One Saturday in April, Gregory came over with 2 of his friends and spent the afternoon in the garage and the back room, clearing out what he called clutter. He asked me beforehand, and I said yes. I thought he meant old magazines and broken lawn equipment. I was sitting out on the porch, not watching closely. Around 4 in the afternoon, I went inside to get a glass of water, and I walked past the hallway office, and the filing cabinet was open. Not just open, emptied. The drawers were pulled out and the folders were gone, and there were 2 big black garbage bags sitting near the door. I asked Gregory what was in the bags. He said, just old paperwork, Dad. Nothing important. I asked if he had looked through it. He said, I went through everything. It's fine. It's all old utility bills and stuff from the title company. You don't need any of that. I didn't say anything else. He tied up the bags and put them in his truck, and he said he'd take them to the recycling center. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the dark and I thought about Gloria sitting across from me in that office in October, using my name the way she did when something mattered. Before you let anyone go through my things. In the morning, before Gregory came back, I went to the office and looked at the bottom shelf. The gray box was still there. He had missed it or not noticed it or not thought it was worth his time. I called Ann Fielder that afternoon. I told her what I had. She said, can you bring it today? Ann's office was on the south side of Lubbock, in a low brick building she'd been in for as long as I could remember. Her assistant brought me back right away, and Ann stood up when I came in. She was in her mid-60s, a sturdy woman with reading glasses on a chain, and she took my hands for a moment before we sat down. I set the gray box on her desk. She put on her glasses. Inside the box were 2 sets of documents. The first was a warranty deed, a property deed for a piece of land outside of Slayton, about 30 miles east of Lubbock, just over 12 acres. The deed was dated 4 years ago, and it was in Addie's name. Not mine. Not the family trust. Addie's name alone. The second set of documents was a folder with a handwritten note clipped to the front. In Gloria's careful slanted handwriting for Ann, she'll know what to do. Ann read the note without speaking. Then she read the documents inside. Then she set them down and was quiet for a moment. Gloria came to me, she said slowly, about 4 years ago. She said she was worried about Gregory. I looked at her. She said she didn't have anything concrete at the time. She said he'd started making comments about the house, about what things were worth, about how it might make more sense financially for you both to simplify, move somewhere smaller, let him manage the assets. She never told me that, I said. She didn't want to upset you, Ann said. She also didn't know yet how serious it was. She asked me to help her put the Slayton property in Addie's name so it would be protected regardless of what happened. And she said she was going to watch and keep records. The second folder was the records, what my wife had documented over the span of 3 years in a series of small notebooks she kept in that gray box, was methodical. She had tracked every request Gregory had made regarding the house, the accounts, the trust documents. She had noted dates, times, what was said. She had printed out account statements and circled withdrawals with a red pen and written question marks next to the ones she couldn't account for. She had also written down 3 names, people I didn't recognize. Addie recognized one of them, an older gentleman from our church, a widower who had sold his house 2 years earlier and moved into an assisted living facility. We had wondered at the time why he'd left so suddenly. Anne brought in a colleague who handled elder financial abuse cases. We spent 2 hours in her office going through everything. At the end, her colleague said, "This is very complete." She built a very complete picture. He said it was something close to admiration. I drove home that day and sat in the kitchen for a long time. I thought about my wife, sitting at her desk in the evenings writing things down, watching, waiting, making sure that if something happened to her, the people she loved would not be left unprotected. She was sick, and she was scared, and she never said a word about any of this to me because she didn't want to add to my worry. Instead, she just prepared. The way she prepared for everything, quietly and without fuss. I put my face in my hands and I cried in a way I hadn't since the funeral. Addie drove down from Amarillo when I called her. I told her what I'd found. She sat across from me at the kitchen table. She was 44. She had her mother's eyes, and she listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The property in Slayton." I said yes. She said she put it in my name. Not a question, just something she was absorbing. She wanted you to have something he couldn't touch, I said. Addie pressed her lips together and looked at the table. After a moment, she said, "I always wondered why she asked me to start keeping copies of my bank statements." What? About 3 years ago, she called me out of nowhere and said, "Just as a habit, it's good practice to keep your own copies of things." I thought she was just being mom. She paused. She was just being mom. We contacted the county sheriff's office and the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services. Anne's colleague coordinated with both offices, the 3 people whose names my wife had written down. The older gentleman from church, a woman who had been a neighbor of ours years before, and a third person we didn't know were all contacted. 2 of them had financial losses they had never reported because they hadn't understood what had happened or felt too embarrassed. Gregory was questioned. Sandra lawyered up immediately, which told you something. Gregory maintained for several weeks that everything had been done with consent, with our knowledge that he was only helping. Then the investigators pulled the bank records. The account withdrawals my wife had circled went back further than I knew. The first one she'd flagged was from almost 5 years prior. Small at first, then not small. I'll spare you the details of the legal process because honestly, I barely understood it myself. What I can tell you is that it took about 14 months from the day I walked into Anne's office to the day Gregory stood before a judge. He was charged with financial exploitation of an elderly person, a first-degree felony in Texas, along with fraud charges related to the other victims. Sandra was not charged. There was not enough evidence to connect her directly, though I have my own views on that. Gregory's attorney argued for leniency, argued that he was remorseful, that the family had suffered enough, that my wife's death had destabilized him. The judge was a woman in her 50s who had been on the bench for over 2 decades, and she listened to all of it with an expression that didn't change much. She sentenced him to 16 years. I did not feel what I expected to feel when she read the sentence. I had thought I might feel relief, or satisfaction, or maybe even grief, some complicated mixture. Instead, I felt very still, like something had come to the end of a long process that had been running in the background of my life for years, only I hadn't known it was running. Addie took my hand in the courtroom. We didn't say anything. The Slotin property. I want to tell you about the Slotin property because I think about it a lot. It's 12 acres east of town, flat West Texas land, the kind that looks like nothing to people who didn't grow up here. Dry grass and caliche and a line of mesquite along the back edge. There's a stot pond that holds water most of the year. There was an old homestead structure on it, a small house that was barely standing when Gloria bought the land. She bought it with money she had saved separately in an account I didn't know about. Over the course of about 8 years, small amounts moved over quietly, the way she did everything, the way her mother had done before her. When I went out there the first time after everything settled, Addie came with me. We parked at the gate and walked the property. It was a cool November afternoon, the kind of pale Texas winter day where the sky is wide and white and the light is thin and clear. The grass was brown and the pond was lower than it should have been, but the mesquites were still holding their leaves. I kept thinking, she was out here. She came to look at this before she bought it. She stood somewhere on this ground and decided it was worth something, and she was right, and she put it in our daughter's name so that no matter what happened, Addie would have it. I don't have the words for what that felt like, standing on land your wife bought without telling you, with money she saved without telling you, because she was protecting the people she loved with everything she had, even while she was dying. Addie fixed the fence that winter and hired someone to stabilize the structure. She's got plans for it eventually. Nothing dramatic, just a place. The 2 victims who came forward received restitution as part of Gregory's sentencing. The amounts were not everything they had lost. They never are. But it was something. I went and visited one of them, the gentleman from our church. He was 81 by then, living in the assisted facility. A small, careful man who shook my hand twice when I arrived. He said he had wondered for 2 years what had happened, whether he had just been foolish, whether it was his fault somehow. I told him it wasn't. He said he was glad to know that. He said my wife must have been a remarkable woman. I said she was. He offered me coffee, and we sat by the window and talked for a while, and when I left, I sat in my truck in the parking lot for about 10 minutes before I could drive. People have asked me. Addie has asked me whether I'm angry at Gregory. I thought about this more than I can say. He is my son. He grew up in my house. He was at the table for 40 years of Thanksgiving dinners, and he has his mother's laugh. And when he was 7, he used to fall asleep in the car on long drives, and I would carry him inside. I am angry, yes, but not in the way I expected. It's not hot. It's a cold, tired kind of anger. The kind that doesn't burn, it just sits. I am angry that he thought we wouldn't notice, or that he decided it didn't matter if we did. I am angry that he took from people who had nothing to spare. I am angry that he made my wife spend the last years of her life watching and documenting and worrying when she should have been resting. I am angry that she had to be that careful, and that she was. That last part doesn't make sense, maybe. But it's true. I'm 71 years old now. I live in the same house in Lubbock. Addie calls every few days, and sometimes she drives down on weekends with the kids. And we sit on the porch and watch the light go across the yard the way it does in late afternoon, that slow West Texas gold. And I think about Gloria. I think about her at her desk in the evenings. I think about her hands on those folders, labeling the tabs in her careful handwriting. I think about her deciding, at some point, that she couldn't fix what was happening, but she could make sure there was something left. She was not a dramatic person. She would be embarrassed, I think, by the amount of attention this has gotten. She would say she was just being practical. She would say any reasonable person would have done the same. No, I'd tell her, not like this. There is a small headstone at the cemetery on the east side of town. Under her name it says faithful and true. Addie chose the words. I didn't argue with them. I still sleep on my side of the bed. I'm not ready to change that. Some mornings I wake up and for just a moment I forget, and then I remember. And the day starts. But I go to the office sometimes, and I sit at her desk. I look at the shelf where the gray box was, and I feel, not exactly peace, but something adjacent to it. Something that has to do with knowing that even at the end, when she was tired and sick and frightened, she was still thinking about us. She always was. If you have someone in your life who loves you like that, steady and quiet, always making sure you hold on to that. You pay attention. You don't always know what they're carrying for you. I didn't, but I know now. I've had a lot of time to sit with all of this. A lot of quiet evenings in that house, at that kitchen table, turning it over. What I keep coming back to is not the courtroom, not the sentencing, not even the moment Anne spread those documents across her desk. What I keep coming back to is Gloria, sitting at that desk in October, using my name the way she only did when something mattered. Rudy, not honey, not anything soft. My name, straight and clear, like a hand placed firmly on your shoulder. She knew something was wrong long before I did. And instead of panicking, instead of confronting, instead of falling apart, she sat down and she started writing things down. She protected what she could protect. She moved carefully and she thought ahead, and she made sure that when she was no longer there, the people she loved would not be left exposed. That is what I mean when I talk about real intelligence. Not the kind you get from a degree or a title. The kind that comes from paying attention, from understanding that the world does not always reward the honest, so the honest have to be prepared. Gloria was never loud about it. She never made a show of being smart. She just knew things and acted on what she knew, and trusted that the truth she was building would hold. It held. Gregory had every advantage in that situation. He was younger, he was confident, he had access, he had a story that sounded reasonable. And for a while it worked. It worked because he counted on the people around him being too tired, too trusting, too grief-stricken to look closely. He made a calculation about human weakness, and he was not entirely wrong about it. I was not paying attention, I'll own that. But he miscalculated one thing. He underestimated her. He assumed that because she was quiet, she was unaware. He assumed that because she never confronted him, she hadn't seen him. That is the mistake people make about people like Gloria. Stillness is not the same as blindness. What he did, what anyone does when they take from people who trusted them, always comes back, not as some force from the universe, not as fate, as math, as consequence. Every withdrawal she circled in red, every name she wrote down, every date and time she logged in those small notebooks. The record existed whether he knew it or not. Cause and effect doesn't care about your intentions. And what Addie and I are left with is not just the land in Slotin, not just the justice that came through the courts. We're left with the understanding of what it means to live with integrity over a long period of time. To show up correctly, not when it's easy, but when it costs you something. Gloria spent the last years of her life scared and sick, and still she did not cut corners. Still she held the line. I am 71 years old and I am still learning from my wife. If you are the kind of person who does the right thing quietly, who keeps records and stays steady and protects the people you love without needing credit for it, keep going. It matters. Even when no one sees it. Even when the people who should be watching are not watching. It all surfaces eventually. It surfaced for us in a gray box on the bottom shelf of a filing cabinet that a careless man forgot to look at. Gloria never forgot anything.